Welcome. My name is Faheem Rashid. I'm a student right here at the University of Texas Arlington. I'm also an actor, and I'm a member of the Cinematic Arts Film Festival class. Before we begin, I would like to thank the Maverick Productions team for putting this on for us, as well as I want to thank our panel for being here as well. The forum we are here to attend is the DEI workshop, which stands for the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity workshop. The purpose of this workshop is actually have you think about your own stories. Why? This is part of the Alphabet Soup Film Competition. The Alphabet Soup Film Competition is sponsored by Samsung. We are holding a 48-hour film competition for the UTA students, faculty, and staff to tell us their stories. It's going to be starting on March 12th, where it's a 48 hours where you have the opportunity to tell us what diversity, equality, inclusion means to you. We want you to write down during this forum, we want you to write down your stories, what you think of, what you feel, so that when the time comes on the 12th, you could actually express that with us. Next week, we'll actually be having another workshop. For those that do not believe they have the ability to make films, we will help you with that. Next week, we'll have a panel of students and teachers come together, breaking down what the filmmaking process is. We will go through each part and let you feel like you're at ease and you're able to do it and share your story with us. But before I begin, let's go back to today. We have three members on the panel that will each talk about their own experiences with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And going back to the Alphabet Soup Film Competition, the kickoff, like I mentioned earlier, it starts on March 12th at 12 p.m. The prizes that we'll be offering for students, there's a first place prize of $500, second place is $300, and third place is $200. But anyone that submits using a Samsung Galaxy product or Samsung product to shoot their film will be entered into a special prize where they could win a brand new Samsung Galaxy Note 20. And that one is open to all faculty, staff, students, and teachers. Without further ado, I guess I'll start by introducing our first speaker. Our first speaker with me right here is Professor Dustin Harp. She's the Director of Women's and Gender Study Program and Associate Professor in the Department of Communications at the University of Texas at Arlington. She received her doctorate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Mass Communications. Her research explores intersection between women, journalism, and mass communications, and media with a specific interest in women and politics, and the influence of social media on the public discourse. She primarily considers how groups are represented in media discourse and ways in which we have situated as producers of being news and knowledge. Also, before we begin, we will be holding a Facebook live event, a YouTube live event, where I'll be monitoring the chats. If you have any questions, please put your questions into the chat, and I'll be telling it to our panels at the end of the speeches. Professor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Of course, I'm trying to share my screen, and it doesn't exactly work as we expect because this is live, and I'm trying to look for a PowerPoint that is buried under a lot of other. There we go. So we will start now with my PowerPoint. Thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Dustin Harp, Dr. Dustin Harp. I have been studying media representation and media production for my entire career as an academic, and even was thinking about it as an undergrad. So let's just get started. I think the first and most important thing for us to talk about right off the bat is representation and this idea of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what exactly are these concepts? A lot of people might think they're all the same. How is diversity different than equity and inclusion? So I want to start off by saying representation matters, and I think that's pretty much what the overarching theme will be as we're getting started today. So diversity is really about the presence of difference. And so when we're talking about film, and the film industry, the presence of difference. And I personally will be mostly talking about content, the representation of content, but we will segue into also talking about the representation of filmmaking and filmmakers, which I think my other two panelist colleagues will better be able to discuss, but I'll move into that at the end of my conversation. So if diversity is the presence of difference, why do we need inclusion and equity? Because inclusion just isn't about that we have diversity in a film. So for example, we have a film and there is a black man or there is a woman in the film. That's not enough. We've got to think about inclusion. And so one way to think about that is that people of different identities, feelings are valued and represented, right? So if you always have the plus size woman as the comedic sidekick, is that really inclusion, even if it is offering some diversity, right? And then equity as well is an approach that ensures everyone has access to opportunities. So the opportunity, access to be a lead character. And so I liked this quote about diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And so how can we think about that right there in terms of film, right? So diversity is being asked to be in the film, but inclusion is being asked to be a lead character, to be a character with lines, to not be a stereotypical character. I wanted to, there are lots and lots of data points that you can find on the internet that talk about the representation and the diversity and inclusion of various different identities in films. So I just wanted to pop up with a little bit just to give some context to why we're talking about this, why this matters. So 2016 top 100 films, and you can see only 31% of speaking characters were women. Okay, so 1/3, less than 1/3. You can look at speaking roles by race. It's pitiful, right? And then it's not just about when they are present, but the invisibility of people, when they're symbolically annihilated, right? They're gone. They're not even present in films. So these are all issues that as filmmakers, you should be thinking about. And now I am going to attempt to get out of the slideshow and show you some of the clips that I had. And I don't see them showing up on the bottom. So let me see if they will show up. No. Do you think that we can get some assistance on this, or?
Well, while we're going through that, by listening to what Professor Harp has been talking about, what do you believe yourself? How do you believe that you yourself can be a filmmaker and help these numbers? You saw the percentages you showed that the speaking characters, they were 7% white. And then it goes farther down and down and down. Is this something that you have a problem with? If it is, write those down, because on the 12th of next month, you have the opportunity to share your story with us. If this is something that you don't like, or it is something that you're supportive, let us know, because this is your opportunity to take these nuggets of information that they have been bestowed upon us and tell us what you believe about them.
Do you think they all opened?
Not just that one.
Okay.
Oh, I believe Ms. Harp is ready.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what I've done is compile a few different clips between, a minute to a couple minutes to illustrate this point, because hearing it from me is not enough. So let's just see some other perspectives on this. And so thinking about numbers aren't everything. Let's think beyond the numbers and about representation.
Hello. I'm here to audition for the 11 Rules Black Men Are Stereotyped to play. Momadou, non-union. Yo, pass me the rock. Yo, pass me the rock again. Pass me the rock. Well, I don't know nothing about opening no kale refinery, but I know that if you got a song in your heart and a skip in your step, gonna go far, young blood. Yo, so I know there's a killer on the loose, but I left my Ray-Bans in the car, so I'm going to go get those alone. See y'all in a few minutes. Welcome to Africa, my brother. No, do not ask what country, it doesn't matter. For the last time, I do not know where the blood diamonds are. Get out of my country. I'm not here to win. I'm here to make friends. Thank you so much, Miss Whiteley. I used to live in the Panasonic TV box out behind the Costco. Son, you're the man of the house now. Dad's gotta go to the gas station, pick up some smokes. It's real far away. 18 years away. I'm in here for 12 counts of battery and 14 counts of possession. When I get out of here, I'm gonna go see my daughter. I love her so much. In the water. Wait, man, I hate this shit. I miss Africa. Also, we were never immigrants. I'm tired of these motherfucking stereotypical roles that these talented ass black men are forced to play. Thank you.
I got it. Nope, I got it.
It was the first time I saw a gay character on TV. It was Andrew Van de Kamp. He was always causing some trouble, unlike me, back then.
I've never seen myself fully represented in media, but the first time that I would say something resonated with me, as cliche as it sounds, is the L Word.
A lesser-known show called South of Nowhere. Rosa Diaz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's kind of a cliche, but the L Word. There's a show called The Boat Type that's on Freeform.
Really haven't seen like a bisexual Asian character.
I have never really seen my whole self represented in media.
Now you have shows like Jane the Virgin, which is really cool about including the queer experience within the immigrant experience, which is kind of my experience.
It's so important for queer folks to see ourselves represented in media, whether we're talking about entertainment media or online or even in the news.
It meant a lot to me to see him and to see him eventually find acceptance from his family.
Her name's Kat Edison. She's a multiracial, queer, 25-year-old just trying to figure out her life in a big city. That's essentially what I'm doing here.
It's important for other people when they're growing up to, all these questions that they have, kind of see them normalized outside of their own experience.
For a long time, folks were closeted largely because they weren't represented.
There was a scene in a relationship between the mother and the daughter that I really identified with. I also ended up coming out to my parents when I was an adult. And just because I had a boyfriend before, and so it never came up. Just seeing that experience of adults having to do that all over again, time and time again, I saw that.
I just want to kind of see movies and film of queer people just existing. It's great, like coming out stories are great, but also we just very often don't see queer people existing as they are.
It's really a great way for folks that are experimenting with their identities, and for youth in particular, who have a hard time coming out, to know that there are other folks just like them, and that our experiences, although all unique, also share many common threads.
I wanted to be like, I just remember seeing him in bed with a boy and being like, ooh, wow, that can actually happen to me. I don't have to just play pretend with a woman my whole life.
For me to see someone who's young and just trying to figure out their identity, whether it's sexuality or racially, it's just very affirming in that, like, it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to venture out and explore and just
take a step out.
I think it's very important to see yourself represented in media because everyone has their own experiences.
You know, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot yet, so it's been kind of really cool to start seeing how things start to change.
Even recently, there's a lot more queer television that's come out. There are some more queer movies, but a lot of the times, the movies that do come out are not something that a lot of queer people can relate to.
It's a little more nuanced rather than just simple, like straightforward representation. I'd prefer it to be a little more galaxy brain.
I would like to see more representation of a wider net of queer people.
We need more representation of non-binary people, more representation of queer people of color, more representations of people who don't even know what their genders are, and their genders are constantly in flux and in process, and played by people who identify as such, not just straight people or cis people playing trans characters.
To see a character that really represents me in media would, it's almost like so transformational, I can't really think about what that would look like.
Wow, those were amazingly strong videos.
Yeah, we have a couple more.
Oh.
Yeah.
There were all these things that my parents showed me and that I didn't get to see on television, which was dignity. Latinos with dignity.
You want me? 60 pesos.
A lot of unconscious racism exists because these type of images, these type of perceptions, these type of values have existed so long. They are the norm.
Sometimes the director says, wow, no, he's more street, you know? He's like, talk like this. He talk like this, man.
Don't let me bang. I only got one more wire, okay?
We are in a new millennium, and these characters still keep popping up. From Puerto Rican. I'll be great at selling drugs.
And I believe we have just a couple more. Yes.
Yes, Lord, got to get out.
The Mammy.
You tell me who you want done, and I'll do the hell out of it.
The Jezebel.
Shut it up!
And the Sapphire. Submissive, sexy, sassy. 3 stereotypes of black women that return to our screens over and over again.
The Mammy is probably the most familiar to people. It's usually a maid, heavy, taking care of the family.
You is kind, you is smart, you is important.
She is asexual. She doesn't have really a life of her own. She's really only there to support the family.
And probably one of the most famous examples is Mammy from Gone with the Wind.
Just hold on and suck it.
Somebody who is always seeking out to put aside her own desires, her own needs for white families, white men, white women, white children.
Meet Sugar Hill, sexiest, deadliest chicken town.
The second stereotype is the Jezebel, and that's someone who's generally oversexed.
Is mysterious.
Her only power is in her body and in the influence she has over men.
Attainable.
And then finally, the Sapphire character, I think that's seen in TV more often than anything else.
Get some Kleenex, wipe your nose, cause it ain't that damn sad.
The Sapphire is usually a sharp-tongued, manipulative woman who emasculates her husband.
All right. So as you can start to see, you know, we're able to see lots of different stereotypes in film and video in lots of
When
different
someone like Scarlett Johansson
ways.
is cast as the lead in an adaptation of a Japanese comic franchise, it's important to understand that the ensuing anger isn't just about that movie. And it's not just about Tilda Swinton playing a Tibetan character in Marvel's Doctor Strange, or Emma Stone claiming to be part Chinese and Hawaiian in Aloha.
My dad was half Chinese and half Hawaiian, and my mother's Swedish.
It's how all these casting decisions combined, dating back to the earliest days of Hollywood, have made Asians invisible at best, and at worst, the butt of a cruel joke. That's why fans notice when the characters from the Last Airbender cartoon become much lighter skinned for the live-action movie. And when John Rico goes from being Filipino in the novel Starship Troopers to being played by someone named Casper Van Dien.
I want to try it again, but this time, we need you to do an accent.
The fact is, things aren't getting better fast enough for Asians in Hollywood. In 1944, Aline McMahon was nominated for an Oscar for her yellow-faced role in Dragon Seed. Later on, Linda Hunt would win an Oscar for playing a Chinese man in The Year of Living Dangerously.
Right. Kwang.
That was 1982, almost 40 years later. Basically everything else in the country had changed, except white people being cast as Asians. For a solid 2 decades, the Chinese detective character Charlie Chan was played by white men in makeup. But that was the 30s and 40s, right? Well, here's Jim Sturgis and Hugo Weaving reincarnated as Koreans for parts of Cloud Atlas. Everyone remembers Mickey Rooney's infamous 1961 performance in Breakfast at Tiffany's as just fully unacceptable and racist, right?
Mr. Go right.
Well, 24 years later, Joel Grey delivered this Korean caricature in Remo Williams.
I think I can do something with him.
And another 2 decades later, here's Rob Schneider in I Now Pronounce You Chuck and Larry.
Now the lings are a symbol of eternity.
Schneider is a quarter Filipino, so progress? Or how about Peter Sellers' 1968 role as a clueless Indian man at a dinner party?
You really crushed my own Indian hat.
A full 20 years later, Fisher Stevens was in brownface for Short Circuit 2.
It's not possible. We are the type of people who have everything.
And another 24 years after that, Ashton Kutcher is doing this in a Pop Chips commercial.
I'm Raj. I'm a Bollywood producer. I'm looking for the most delicious thing on the planet.
Arguably worse than white people playing Asian characters is white people playing real-life Asian humans, which is what happened to Cora Lyjak in Argo, and to Jeffrey Ma, who appeared in the movie 21 as this character, even though in real life he was this guy.
Ben Campbell was the most gifted student at MIT.
It's not surprising that directors want to hire big names to attract producers and funding, but when they want to do stories about Asians and won't cast Asian actors, they should know that the blowback against that has been building for the better part of a century.
Sakini by name, interpreter by profession.
All right, now we can head back to our conversation and and I was hoping our PowerPoint, so I do know where that is. So what I wanted to, in showing that, and the reason I picked so many different clips was so that you can see that this problem of stereotyping and invisibility, this representation and diversity and inclusion and equity, goes along many different lines of identities. And so I want everybody to be aware this isn't happening to just one person and that there's a history to it. Several of these clips touch on the fact that this is historical and yet still going on today. And a couple decades ago, someone created something called the Bechtel Test, which was a measurement of representation of women in film. And the idea was that the film had to do 3 things. It had to have at least 2 women who had names in that film. Those 2 women had to talk to each other, at least for a few seconds on camera, and they needed to talk about something other than a man. That simple test, many films that you've seen do not actually pass that simple test, including The Avengers, Jackie Brown, Toy Story 2, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Avatar, Harry Potter's The Goblet of Fire. But we need to move beyond something as simplistic as the Bechtel test and start looking into even expecting more of the film industry. And with that, I want to end with saying behind the scenes, who's making those films, who's working on those films, who's casting those films, needs to change and be more diverse in order to start to see more diversity inside the content of the films. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to some of the panelists who are filmmakers on this panel.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Harp. Mentioning the Bechtel Test, it reminds me of so many sitcoms that they actually have episodes devoted to just that idea, and it always ends with they fail that test in every single episode. Yeah, it usually even happens in the first couple seconds. They usually have a little brief period between the two female actors. They don't even say anything, and automatically they fail it by talking about men. But thank you for all the insight you gave us. Now let's move on to our next guest, Professor Yaki Smith. Yaki Smith is known for his unflinching and vivacious style of storytelling, a rising voice in the independent cinema. His films have received worldwide acclaim, screenings, and award-winning over 100 film festivals. The Directors Guild of America, the Students Academy Award, HBO, Showtime. He's been featured on NPR, NBC, IndieWire, and Filmmaker magazine. Yaki has received a MFA from the University of Texas of Austin Film Program, where he's currently an Associate Professor of Film and Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Moody College of Communication. He was previously the Morgan Woodward Distinguished Professor of Film at the University of Texas at Arlington. Variety magazine named him one of the best film educators in the world. Wow. Now I can't wait to learn from him.
So I'm going to assume you all can see me because I can't see myself.
No, right now the computer seems to be stuck on the PowerPoint, and I'm trying to. Okay.
Professor Yaki, do you mind if I ask Professor Harp a question while we get this? Oh, it looks like we got this right.
We are good. Yeah.
Good. So can you see me?
Oh, yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And Professor, that was excellent. You brought us some excellent points, and I'll probably echo a lot of what you just said. Because I think one of the big things that you said, I'm going to show a video as well, but I just want to talk for a second, is that representation matters. And I think as simple as that sounds, right, and oftentimes as cliche as that may sound to people, the truth of the matter is a lot of people do not take that into consideration when they begin to think about how they are going to put their films together. Because oftentimes we think of representation mattering only in front of the camera, not understanding, and it's something you just said at the very end, that the only way the representation will matter in front is if, in fact, we have gatekeepers behind the scenes who are actually conceiving of these projects. And one of the big things that we see, and we've always seen this in Hollywood from its inception, is that there are not enough filmmakers of color, there are not enough women filmmakers that are actually at the helm of these projects, when in fact these projects are quote unquote about their experiences. And I say that because I think one of the big things that filmmakers need to understand is that I'm not saying that you only need to write what you know, but I am saying that you need to become intimate with whatever it is that you write. And oftentimes what happens is we create projects based upon other films that we've seen, right? Not realizing that oftentimes those films might be, full of the same stereotypes that we're trying to get away from, yet you're using those films as inspiration to create characters from cultures, environments, places that you do not know, that you have never spent any time in. And that is a very, very sort of dangerous thing to do, because all you end up doing, right, is recycling these same stereotypes over and over again. One of the big things that I also think is important is that we start to think about who are the gatekeepers, not just the creators, but who are the gatekeepers? Because oftentimes, right, you'll have Black writers, right? You'll have Black producers even. But when they walk into a meeting with a studio, no one in that room looks like them. No one understands them. They spend most of their time in that room, not even explaining the project, but in many times humanizing themselves, right? They have to get over that hump first. Then by the time it comes to actually talking about the project, guess what? You're exhausted. You don't have anything else to give. Because in fact, you've spent your whole time trying to let someone know that, one, you deserve to be in the room, that this story deserves to be told, that the characters that you are telling are actually real human. I've had executives say to me, Black people don't talk like that, or That doesn't ring true to me because, again, they are basing their idea of who I am off of something that they've seen because they've never really lived in my shoes and they've never really sat down and took the time to get to know me, right? So we need more of those gatekeepers in the room who can actually greenlight these projects. Once these projects are greenlit, right, and this gets even into the making of these things, oftentimes what you'll see is you will have directors of photographers, you will have art directors, production designers, again, who are not familiar with the culture that they are trying to portray on screen. So what happens is they don't know how to light black skin. They don't know how to make certain cultures look flattering, right? They've never really, again, researched anything beyond the stereotype of what the house of, again, the Asian person actually looks like. They come in with all of these sort of stereotypical, you know, things that they hang on the walls and colors, not realizing like everybody's house doesn't look like that, right? Because again, they're basing that off of something that they have seen or heard, but nothing that they really researched or known intimately, right? And so when you begin to think about, I'm talking about filmmakers here, obviously, when you begin to think about conceiving of your project, you really do need to ask yourself the question, how am I going to not only sort of vis-a-vis the content that I'm writing, portray this character, but again, the way that I'm shooting the character, right? We know that historically a lens was not made specifically, and I'm talking about black people now, it was not made to make me look flattering. It was actually not made to humanize me. It was actually made to dehumanize me. Yet we are still working with that same system, those same types of lenses. Oftentimes, and obviously the cameras have shifted and changed, but in many ways, internally, a lot of it is exactly the same because no one has really thought about, wait a minute, how do you create a lens that makes the black face, right, not look distorted? And if you don't have the lens to do that, how do you now use the existing production equipment that you have to make sure, again, that you are not distorting the skin, that you are not slapping a bunch of Vaseline on someone because you don't know how to make their skin reflect correctly, that you are not, you know, I'm thinking about Coming to America, for example. There's a scene, and somebody talked about it, where Eddie Murphy is about to marry his wife at the very end, and she has on a pink dress because they could not conceive of actually how to light this black woman in a white dress. How do we do this? They didn't understand it. How do you light him next to her and actually make sure that it's balanced? Because again, they hadn't thought through that, right? And so I think it's important that we begin to think about those things as we, again, shoot our characters, light our characters, and design things around our characters. Another thing is, I think it's, when we talk about stereotypes, and to be honest with you, I think one of the things that we have to remember, right? Like I'll say this, one of the films that made me want to be a filmmaker is Boys in the Hood, right? Now on its face, right, you could say, wait a minute, it has the crackhead, it has the mother who's not taking care of her kids, it has all of those quote unquote stereotypical characters. But what does John Singleton do? He elevates that narrative by doing several things. One, he humanizes these characters, right? He makes them more than just that. Oftentimes, it's not about the quote-unquote stereotype. It's oftentimes about the why, right? We always portray people a certain way, but we never really answer those deep questions about why people end up in the circumstances they end up in. That is the thing that humanizes them, right? Also, he understood the world that he was writing about. That is so important. Understand the world. Now, he understood it on a very intimate level, right? Because he lived it. He understood. If you don't understand it, if you've not lived it, and I talk to my students about this all the time, research, spend time, talk to people, get out, ask the questions, make yourself uncomfortable. I did a film about a young lady who was sex trafficked. I actually spent time with women who had been sex trafficked. I spent time with pimps. I put myself in maybe suspect situations trying to really research and understand the world that I was creating because I did not want to create something that was stereotypical. I wanted to really elevate the narrative and humanize these characters that in many ways have been dehumanized since the beginning of film, right? So that is very, very important. Also, I think it's important to understand the history of film, right? And that's why I love the clips that Professor Harp showed, because I think it's so important that you understand that these stereotypes are in a continuum, right? They are not just happening, right? These things have been happening forever. So I'm gonna go all the way back to 1915, Birth of a Nation. When you think about Birth of a Nation, you have to think about it in this way. One, this is a film that single-handedly helped, right, raise the numbers of the KKK, right? Because what did it do? It showed black people as rapists, as robbers, as vagrants, as people that white Americans needed to protect themselves from, right? There's a great scene where you see us in the house, in the Senate House, and we are eating chicken, and we have our shoes off, and we have our feet up on the table, and we're, basically picking at our toenails and all these things again. These images were created for a very specific reason, to dehumanize, to other, right? I'll use that word, other, a lot here, because othering is what oftentimes happens when you see characters that are not white and men, basically, right? Because again, those individuals who are making those films, one, they don't know, but also we gotta understand this. I said this yesterday in another panel. These things oftentimes are done on purpose. Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith, you can read about it, he will say, I didn't know what I was doing, I was just telling the truth, blah, blah, blah. But no, you were doing that because you understood, again, how you felt about blackness, right? The ways in which you wanted other people to feel about blackness, and you also understood the power of the medium that you were working with, right? That leads me to the next thing. When you understand, and I'm back to Birth of a Nation, when you understand that film, we talk about it as a seminal work, right? It is a racist work. It is a grotesque work. It is a work that, again, was used as a weapon against Black Americans. However, the fact that it could wield that much power lets you know that the medium itself has a lot of agency, that when people sit in a dark room and they watch something, that they are completely affected, influenced, and oftentimes it makes them think about certain things in a very, very particular way. Hence why stereotypes in film are dangerous. Because if the only interaction, right, that you've had with me as a black man is vis-a-vis a film where I'm a criminal, a slave, a magical Negro, everything that you described in that clip, then you're gonna assume that's who I am in real life. So that then when you actually meet me, you never give me a chance to actually introduce myself to you, because you have already come into our relationship, right, with these preconceived ideas of who I am. That's why the representation matters. Also, it's something we have to say too. Oftentimes, and this goes into every minority group, there is no one way to be, right? There is no one way to be black. There is no one way to be a woman. There is no one way to be Asian. There's no one way to be disabled. There's no one way to do any of these things. And oftentimes, what film does, right, is it creates a very, very narrow idea, perception of these individuals. And again, it makes you think that that's the only way that they are. And it makes you think that that's the only thing that you can create about you, because it's the only thing that you've ever seen. I love the clip where the man says, and it's something you just showed, where he says, I saw that the two guys in bed, and I was like, oh, that could happen to me. Because again, what it did is it validated something that he always felt inside, but he'd never actually seen on screen before. And that's what we need to think about when we are creating these images. How do we validate someone's experience and the totality of their experience and humanity, not just a very, very narrow idea of who they are, because again, that is very, very, very dangerous. Now I want to show my reel, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen, okay?
Good luck.
Right. Open share tray, right? And then I think I'm going to do this.
If it doesn't work, you could always act it out for us.
I could, right? What are you seeing right now?
Just your desktop.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
So grant access. Do I need to do that? Yes. Am I doing this wrong?
Gotta get the...
Okay, I think I'm supposed to grant access here. Hold up. Sorry, y'all. I think maybe I should have did this beforehand.
I really like some of the comments you made. You know, I think the so what, why this all matters is so important, you know? And I think that, like you said, that LGBTQ clip that showed all these people talking about why it mattered, what they saw, is really powerful.
You said it correctly. Like, everyone has their own story. There's no one way to be a person of color. There's no one way to be a person of what. And going back to the film competition, that's why exactly one of the reasons why we're having this. We want to hear your stories, how you view being X, Y, Z. What are you? What do you view other people? That's why we want to see what you believe.
Exactly. Now, can you see?
Yes.
What do you see now? You do see it.
Yes, we're seeing you're getting ready to click play.
Yep. Okay.
Should there be sound that we're hearing?
Yes.
Okay, we're not hearing the
Unfortunately,
sound.
yeah.
I'm guessing that was a grant access thing as well.
Okay. Sorry, y'all. I don't use Teams, so this is all new to me. Okay. Would that be preferences, maybe? No?
No. How about this? While you're getting that set up, do you mind if we go straight to Professor Proctor while you get this ready?
Not at all.
Okay. So let me introduce Ms. Proctor first. Jen Proctor is an award-winning filmmaker whose scholarly and creative interest embraces issues of gender representation, cinematic deconstruction, and history of experimental and narrative films. Her current research focuses on the inclusive I can't even pronounce that word, pedagogy in media production. She is the co-founder and principal investigator of Edit Media, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Tech Media, and a national intensive dedicated to researching, developing, and educating about best practices intensive teaching in media production. She's received her MFA Film Studies and MFA Film and Video Productions from the University of Iowa. Plus, most importantly, she is an expert in abnormal feline behavior. I have a cat named Buffy who acts like a vampire. Maybe you could help me with that.
Nice, thank you. And I should mention too, I am an alum of the University of Texas at Austin, so it is nice to be back in Texas, even though there's snow outside my window here in Michigan. And I'd just like to really underscore and highlight everything that Professor Smith and Professor Harp just shared. And I'm going to be probably building on a lot of that in what I'm about to talk about. So I'm going to be the next victim to attempt to share my screen. So hopefully you are seeing a website right now.
Yes,
so
we are.
I'm going to talk a little bit about Edit Media. And Edit Media stands for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Teaching Media. And this is a nationwide initiative that a group of faculty in film and video programs started to address questions that Professor Harp and Professor Smith just talked about. How do we ensure that we're building into film education a truly inclusive kind of experience? And that means ensuring that all students, regardless of their identity or their background or their socioeconomic status, their identity, are all part of the community of making film in their academic film majors. And that they're given opportunities to thrive, they're given support to thrive. And so this is a project in which we help to train film professors how to be truly inclusive in their teaching, and share resources and just sort of help to sort of move our film schools in the direction that Professor Smith was just outlining. About how we make sure we're breaking down stereotypes, we're creating authentic stories, we're drawing from individual experiences to tell new kinds of stories. So that's part of what Edit Media is about. And what I particularly wanted to share, since there's a group here that's getting ready to do this 48-hour video race, is a document that we created in collaboration with students, film students from around the country, called the Student 7. And you can find this on the Edit Media website, and our website, as you might guess, is editmedia.org. But this is sort of just a set of principles for students to think about as you're moving through your film major to ensure that you're getting the most out of your media production education as you can, and really thinking about how you can be breaking down some of these barriers and building up more attention to diversity, to equity, to inclusion for yourself and for the people around you. So a lot of these principles, I'm delighted to hear, really align with what Professor Smith and Professor Harp were just talking about. And so I'm just going to go through these a little bit quickly. But these are things that you can be thinking about just as you're studying film and moving through your film major, but also as you're thinking about whatever you're going to make for your video race. So the first principle is to watch the world. And what this really means is, as a film student, getting outside of your comfort zone of the kind of media, the kind of films that you love to watch, and watching things that you wouldn't normally watch, whether that's watching a different genre. So if you're like a rom-com person, maybe you start watching some more horror. If you're a horror person, then maybe you start watching more drama. It means maybe watching foreign language films. Maybe you're not normally a huge fan of subtitles, but try giving it a shot so that it becomes part of your comfort zone. Watch work from other countries, watch work from earlier in film history. Get out there and really start seeing what else has been made around the world, partly because that just informs you, it makes you a better film maker when you know what else has come before and what else is out there. But it can also, you're going to be borrowing different styles and different techniques that you discover in these other films. It's also a way that you can discover how you might, make sure that you're writing characters that are not based on previous stereotypes, right? In order to know if you're accidentally writing a character that's a stereotype, you need to know what kinds of characters have come before. So this is all about just getting out there and watching as much stuff as you can from all different corners of the world and all different moments of film history. Number 2 is chart new territory. And this is, again, kind of getting back to this idea that representation matters. And so this is encouraging you to think about, again, not just writing characters based on characters that you've seen in movies, but when you write characters for your own story, to think about people that you know in your own life. Or as Professor Smith was saying, if you want to write a character that's from an area of life that you're not familiar with, so get out there and do the research, right? You often hear that guidance to write what you know. Well, one way to write what you know, if you don't already know something, is to go out there and learn it, right? And then you know it, and then you can write about it. So charting new territory is about immersing yourself and learning about the lives and perspectives of people different from your own, of learning new ways of looking at the world so that you can tell fresh, authentic stories that are true to you and that introduce something new into the filmmaking landscape. Number 3 is set squad goals, and that's really just about collaboration, right? So making sure that you're working as an inclusive team. And that means if you're the kind of person that just likes to jump in and take a leadership role, that's awesome, but just make sure that you're leaving room for others to also participate on the crew. If you tend to be somebody who kind of hangs out by the sidelines a little bit to try to assert yourself a little bit more so that you become an equal part of the team, it's about listening to one another, sharing power, showing respect, right? Just being good crew members for one another so that you're supporting each other's learning. And really, when you're in film school, this is a process of learning. So it's all about making sure that you're on the same page and moving forward together. Geek out in every way is really just sort of about the idea that a lot of us really just love to get geeky with equipment, right? Some of us are just real gearheads and we just want to bury ourselves in using the very best camera that we can get our hands on. We spend all our time learning about the ins and outs of the camera and how to get the highest quality image, which is awesome. But as you probably know, your film is only as good as your content, right? Your image might be beautiful, but if you're not sharing authentic, complex characters or stories that have plots that are going to resonate with an audience, then it doesn't matter how good your technology is. So it's about making sure that your concept, your focus on concept and representation is just as sophisticated and gets just as much attention as the equipment that you might be using. Knowing the rules and then breaking them is also about like learning about what's come before, thinking about making sure that you really understand the assignment, making sure that you really understand how to tell a great story or how to craft a great character arc. Know how to do that, and then start thinking about how you can break those rules, right? How you can create something new. Not being afraid to dream big and to really like be paying attention to what's happening in the media landscape right now that you might be plugging into. Number 6 is create courageously. So the other thing that's awesome about being in film school is that this is a place where you can take risks, right? This is where you can try to do things that you've never done before, where you can maybe take risks that don't work out the way you want, and it's not going to be the end of the world, but you get to learn from them. It's not as easy to take those kinds of risks once you're out in the world and there's lots of money that are involved in a film that you're making. So this is the time to like embrace mistakes, make missteps, challenge what's come before, experiment, and see what you can come up with, because you might innovate something new in the process. And then lastly is look both ways. And this again really goes back to a lot of what Professor Smith and Professor Harp were saying, which is to take time to reflect on yourself. Who you really are, what your perspectives are, where you might still have some learning to do, and to practice that self-reflection. Think about what assumptions you're making when you're writing a character and question those assumptions. And look outward too. Like, what are some ways in which you could bring new kinds of characters into a story that you're telling that you might not have otherwise considered, because you're looking out and seeing what else is out there in the world. And again, you're doing your research to make sure that you understand environments and landscapes and communities and people that are different from you when you go to create those characters in your film. So I just share this as an example of one of the things that Edit Media is doing in collaboration with students to try to build a stronger sense of inclusion within our film programs across the country, with an eye towards also changing the film industry, as Professor Harp had laid out earlier, to also be more inclusive and to be more diverse and to be more equitable, so that we're hitting these targets in all different aspects of the pipeline of film education into the film industry. So I think I'll stop there. I'm eager to see Professor Smith's clip, so hopefully that is working now. And so I will attempt to figure out how to stop sharing my screen. Go back. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for everything you just bestowed upon us. Professor Smith, were you able to get it to work?
We hope, right?
All right. My fingers and toes are crossed.
It's an open share tray. Screen on. Let's hope this works. Let me know if you cannot hear this, okay?
Will do.
All right.
We can hear it.
Perfect.
I'm next Wednesday. I'm gonna be a good bitch. You gonna dance for me? Well, you can't stay here. Well, I'm gonna go. I don't know. Mama, don't you call me that no more, goddammit. Can't you see I ain't your mama no more? He may double this in an hour. And then what? Get locked back up again? Shit, I might as well be. At least in prison, I had food, people who cared about me, a roof over my head without dealing with motherfucking shit.
guide them through their lives, to show them how to be honorable, trustworthy men of God. You've destroyed him. Come up to be like him?
No, baby. You're not him. You've got to leave all this stuff behind.
I really wanted to be the kind of mama you needed me to be, but I couldn't. And I know that you can't accept that right now. I know you can't. But I needed you to hear from me.
That was beautiful.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah. Do you mind giving us a little insight onto what each one of those films were?
Yeah, so I don't even know if I remember each film. I have to look at the really. But yeah, so I think in there you see Katrina's Son, which is a film about a young boy who loses his grandmother during Hurricane Katrina, and he travels to San Antonio in search of his mother, who he hasn't seen in ages, hoping to reunite. And all he has with him is a dog and postcards that his mother has written him over the years. And then you see Heavenly, pieces of that, which is about a young girl who is an aspiring ballet dancer. She's actually a ballet prodigy. And she winds up getting sort of swept up in a relationship with a man who she thinks is her lover, but ultimately she finds out that he's a pimp. And once he traps her, the only way that she can escape is through these fantasies of ballet. So the film becomes almost this, I always say it's like Pan's Labyrinth and Black Swan all thrown into one. Because it has these beautiful moments of fantasy, and then it has these very visceral and gritty moments of her really trying to physically escape the brutality that this man, and these other women, I should say, because he has sort of a group of women that also work with him, but these people are inflicting upon her. Also, I think you saw an episode of a show that I directed called Murder Made Me Famous. That was actually Scandal Made Me Famous, and it was actually about what is her name? She just passed away. The teacher who slept with her 12-year-old student. I can't think of her name.
Mary Kay Letourneau.
Mary Kay Letourneau, right? And that's an interesting show because it is actually produced out of Dallas by AMS, and we basically chronicle different stories of like scandals and murders. And now they have another one called The Price of Fame, and so I've directed several of those. One on Muhammad Ali, David Koresh, different things. I believe you also saw pieces of my web series, The Beginning and Ending of Everything, which is about a woman who is released from prison, and she comes back to reunite with the baby that she had when she was in prison, only find out that the baby is nowhere to be found. And so the story is not only about her trying to put the pieces of her life back together, but it's also about this mother who's on a quest to find this child, because she has no clue where it is. She left it with the child's father, and he seemingly gave the kid away. And so it's about that. There's a great movie by the Dardenne brothers called L'Enfant, which deals with something that's very similar, right? They have this kid, and this guy decides, oh, she doesn't really love the kid, so I'm just sell the kid. And that's when he realizes how much she loves the kid, and that's when sort of I think the idea of being a parent wakes him up, and they actually both go on this quest to find this baby. But yeah, I think those are the clips that are in there, and I've made several films since. Actually, this reel was done 2 years ago. Since then, I've made a few shorts, Brother, The Pandemic Chronicles, Dear Bruh, which is not in there at all. But what you will see, the thread in all of these films, is I'm really dealing with some of the most pressing issues of our time. I'm really dealing with really giving, and I think Professor Harp used this term earlier, I think you said this, but this is something I always say, giving visibility to those who have been deemed invisible. And really, another way that I put that is I'm giving voice back to those whose voices have been stolen from them. Because I think it is important for these narratives to be told from the perspective of those who are closest to the pain. For me, it's always about making sure that I am creating empathy for these characters, that I am creating multidimensional portraits of these characters, and that I am really showing an evolution of these characters. And then also that I am, in some ways, making sure that we never forget that there are societal ills, right? That there are certain sort of environments that have been set up for certain individuals to fail. So what I mean by that is, we always talk about, crack, right, in the Black community, and we don't realize how strategic this whole thing is, right? How, in some ways, that is also used as a way to, one, ruin the Black community, that it is used as a way to perpetuate further stereotypes about the Black community, and it is really used as a way to annihilate it. So not only am I having to overcome sort of my own internal trauma, right, that we all as humans have, but now I'm having to overcome these governmental policies or these governmental weapons that have really been waged against me. That's sort of something that I always want to make sure that I bring into great focus with all of my work.
Nice.
Jen,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wondered if Jen could talk a minute about how she's incorporated some of these ideas of diversity and inclusion into her films.
Into my filmmaking?
Yes.
So my films for the past few years are found footage films. They're essentially what I call kind of a narrative mashup. Or a narrative supercut. And so what I'm doing is looking at particularly representations of women, although intersectional representations of women in popular film, and deconstructing those images through re-editing and appropriation. So my recent film, Nothing a Little Soap and Water Can't Fix, essentially takes images of women in bathtubs from a huge variety of films and strings them together in such a way that we see the very narrow ways in which women are presented in this domestic space and what that means. And so we see, women washing in bathtubs and shaving their legs in bathtubs and reading a book in bathtubs, pleasuring themselves in bathtubs, often in ways where the shot composition is almost identical from one shot to the next. But then where that space that women use to seek refuge also becomes a trap where they're ultimately slaughtered. And so the bathtub is also an extremely common place for horror films and violence to be waged against women. So I assembled that from over 100 films into this sort of narrative that points out the commonality of these tropes in the way that women are confined in this particular domestic space of the bathtub and the bathroom. So those are the kinds of things that I do in my work as a way of critiquing the narrow representations of women and women's bodies in popular cinema.
Nice. I may be wrong with this, but as far as somewhere, the first scene of a female dying in the bathtub, was that Psycho in 1960, or was there one before that?
So interestingly, I don't include Psycho in this film because that's technically a shower, not a bathtub.
That is true. That is true. Yes.
And I think actually showers function in a slightly different way, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure that there was probably a woman killed in a shower before Psycho, but Psycho was the film that made that iconic.
Well, I will say I prefer the shower because I don't shave my legs in the tub. I shave it in the shower.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Going back to something that Professor Yaki mentioned, this is actually a question for all three of you. He mentioned making the visible those who are deemed invisible. Many times, especially nowadays, where we have more resources to share with each other, and we have access to these phones, which can be used to create films equal to something that would have been, the cost of a house 20 years ago. How do you actually make someone feel like they have a story worth being told. Because a lot of people, they're not invisible because others tell them they're invisible. They're invisible because they themselves tell themselves they're invisible, that their voice does not matter. How do you make them feel their voice matters and what they have been through is something that everyone should watch and share in?
I'm going to go ahead and start with something which is an interesting, you said they feel they are invisible, but I'm going to go back and say it's kind of a loop, right? So they feel invisible because they have been made invisible. And this is the whole media really does have effects on people. It really, you learn, especially as a young person, you learn about life that you don't experience through TV and movies and, you know, so I just want to kind of say, I think it's really a loop. I think that people think they're invisible because they've been told they're invisible. I'm going to leave it to the two of you filmmakers to answer the next part of that.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you, and I think it almost sort of lends itself to the answer to the question, and that is to make sure that the representations of them are actually seen, are made, and that they see themselves on screen in different ways, right? Because to your point, I think a lot of what, it's almost like the stereotypes become real because they're the only things that we see, right? Right? Even though, right, deep down inside, right, we don't feel those things, when we see it played for a loop for us over and over and over again, we start to think we're not worthy. We start to think that, yeah, we're not going to be able to get that job. We're not going to be able to get into that university. Yeah, well, nobody cares about my experience. And yeah, maybe it is my fault that I'm in the place that we're in. It's like, for me, one of the things I always say to people is that it was not until I sort of moved away from the hood that I really began to see the way that, I guess I should say, the social infrastructure that was created, right? That in some ways trapped people into doing a lot of the things that they did. Because to your point, it does become a loop. But when you're in the loop, you can't see that it's a loop. You don't see it as a loop. You actually just identify it as your truth. And you, in some ways, blame yourself for your own oppression. It's not until you get out and you can like look at it from miles away that you begin to say, wait a minute, but why did I have to go to that school where when I was in high school, I couldn't even take books home. We had class sets, so I had to do my homework at school because they couldn't afford the books. Why was I subjected to that? Why couldn't I have a locker? Why were there drug dogs coming in and out of my school every time? That made me feel like a criminal. It actually made me feel scared to go to school, even though I never had no drugs at school, right? But again, you just say, well, that's just how it is, until you get out and you realize that, no, that's not how it is, because everybody doesn't have that same experience. And so again, I'm saying all that to say that it is about making sure that we represent, as I said earlier, the full humanity of people, and that they can really see themselves rendered wholly on screen, on YouTube, and every different kind of media that we're consuming every day. Because if they can see themselves that way, then they can begin to change the situations that they're in, and ultimately the things that are ailing them, right? They can stop those things from happening to them.
I think we're in an environment right now, right, where films and television are sort of existing in the same landscape as social media and YouTube and web series and TikTok, right? Where I think when you get on TikTok and you see all these different people representing themselves in all these different ways, it brings into relief how limited a lot of the representations are in traditional film. And so when you're kind of asking this question about, well, what happens when people have access to their phones, right? And anybody can kind of make anything. I think we see that play out, not so much in the traditional film landscape, but in this other online media landscape. And that there's a visibility that can happen there that the film industry, and I think to a less extent, the television or the streaming industries still resist, right? But the other thing I want to say about that is that access to phones has also made visible something that white supremacy has made really careful to stay invisible, which is police brutality against Black people, right? The reckoning from Black Lives Matter has happened in large part because there is now audiovisual evidence of this kind of brutality that otherwise could be just denied, right? And this started, with Rodney King as well. Just now there's evidence that is undeniable and that is making something visible that otherwise was invisible, which I realize is not speaking so much to the creative process of filmmaking, but speaking to the power of being able to shoot things on your phone and have an alternate distribution method, which is all of these social media applications. And so I think that's something that the film industry needs to start reckoning with a little bit better. And if part of the problem the film industry is struggling with is that people are often drawn to the more authentic stories that they might be finding from just everyday people sharing their experiences than to, the more packaged and, limited kinds of, and I should say repackaged stories that we're getting kind of churned out of Hollywood all the time.
There's a saying that art follows life, but at the same time, life is more expansive than what art has been shown.
Yes.
We're actually running out on towards the end, so do you mind? I'm going to ask you guys one more question. Do you mind giving in 1 or 2 sentences what DEI means to you and how the participants of this film festival can help show that to the audience, that us, pretty much?
I mean, for me, I'll just start. I think it's interesting because for a while, I'm gonna be very honest with you, I rejected even my own title of being called the Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And the reason why I did that is because for me, it's the equity part that needs to be at the top of this totem pole, right? Because, and Professor Harp, I think you illustrated it so well, but diversity oftentimes just means that you get me in the room. But what does that really mean? It means that in some ways I'm a prop. Man, we've seen it, even in film, if you think about it. A lot of times when you see people of color, you see women, they're props. They're there to basically serve the narrative of the white protagonist. They have no agency, they have no humanity, they have no say. You don't know anything about them, really. They literally are a prop.
How do they go from a prop in the room? Because right now what we're doing is we're opening the door for them. What do they do to you?
What do you do, right? For me, and I'm the Dean, Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, the first thing that I say is, all right, now we have these individuals in the room, we gotta make sure that they have a voice in the room, that they have decision-making power in the room, that their ideas are listened to in the room, and that we make sure that they are getting the same resources as everyone else that is also in that room. You will be surprised how you can sit around, in a meeting and there's 10 of us, and there is so much pay inequity sometimes. And sometimes the person that's being paid the less is doing most of the work.
Yeah.
You would never know that because your salary's not out there, right?
Yeah.
But you start to look at it and you say, well, why is she being paid less than him? When in fact, she's the one sitting on 9 committees and he's more confused.
Thank you for that.
So somebody has to be in the room to raise their hand and say, wait a minute, this is not acceptable. She should not be doing more than him. He should not be doing less than that person. Me as a black person, every time you get ready to bring somebody in, I should not have to come into the room and have this whole spiel about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It needs to just become a part of the DNA of our organization so we don't keep having to have conferences about it. There's a great book sitting here called Diversity Inc. by Pamela Newkirk, and she talks about how corporations spend more money talking about diversity and inclusion and having training than they do actually, spend the money actually doing something about it. Don't have the training, just pay the person more, and then we can move past it.
Thank you for that. It seems like we have about 2 minutes left, so Professor Dustin and Professor Proctor, either one of you have last words?
I'm going to leave it to Professor Proctor.
I mean, and I want to kind of leave it to Professor Smith. That was great.
I agree. I mean,
I would just sort of echo all of those same things. That it's, and I get hung up on that too. And I think a lot of people get hung up on that term diversity. But diversity is just like the very first baby step. From there, it's about equity. It's about justice. It's about inclusion. It's about opportunity. It's about all of those other things that actually bring people into the fold. And so that's what it means to me as well.
Thank you for that. And to everyone watching out there, please, if you have any questions, email us at alphasoupfilm@gmail.com. There we could give you all the information you need about the film festival, and also we could also hand over any comments and concerns you have to the professors. I want to thank you, all three of you, again for the time you gave to us, and as well as the words of wisdom.
All right, thank you. I was happy to be here.
All right.